The reports from Pinehaven never sounded dramatic when they were first written. They appeared in quiet ranger logs, in brief visitor statements, in small handwritten notes, meant only to record simple facts. A missing shadow, a fog that held whispers, footsteps that ended on level ground. Each detail seemed harmless on its own, something easy to overlook, something a tired hiker or a busy ranger could explain away. But when the logs were placed side by side across decades, across trails, across weather and seasons, a pattern began to take shape. A pattern the park never addressed in public briefings or official summaries. A pattern made of repeated anomalies that lined up too neatly to ignore. Today, we're looking at those quiet records, not to draw conclusions, not to dramatize, but to follow the slow, steady trail of observations left behind by people who walked the deeper sections of the forest and noticed things they weren't meant to. The ridgeline where the signals died. The northern span of Pinehaven National Park looks quiet from a distance. Rows of tall pines line the slopes in even shapes, and the air hangs over the forest in a steady, pale colour that does not change much through the day. The area known to rangers as Section 42B sits on the far western side, well beyond the public picnic areas and looping trails. On official maps, the place appears ordinary, nothing more than a wide stretch of trees and rock. Yet the internal logs stored in the archive room show that this part of the park has carried a pattern of missing signals, lost hikers, and unexplained equipment failures for more than 3 decades. The earliest clear record comes from the 17th of May 1994. A volunteer hiker named Thomas Greer entered the park through the west access gate carrying a standard ranger-issued radio. At 10:42 a.m., he made a short transmission. Approaching the ridgeline now, his voice sounded steady. Rangers later wrote that the signal faded fully within seconds. Greer did not return that day. When his pack was recovered weeks later, the radio inside was still charged. One ranger added a small line in the log: "Unit active, failure not replicated." No further notes were attached. The ridgeline sits roughly 2 kilometers north of the Western Trail. It is a thin rise of exposed stone shaped like a spine. It carries no tall cliffs, no iron-rich deposits, and no deep canyons that would normally disrupt radio traffic. Yet between 1994 and 2001, at least 5 hikers reported momentary silence in their radios at almost the exact same spot. A botanist named Elaine Foster noted the issue in her 1999 field journal. Signal ended mid-sentence, no static, just absence. Foster disappeared 3 months later along the same route. Only her notebook was found. The park never warned visitors about the ridgeline. Instead, later pamphlets quietly removed references to the rise and rewrote the trail descriptions to curve around it. Old rangers sometimes refer to the area as the Dead Strip, not as a dramatic name, but as a simple way to label search regions. An internal memo from 2004, written by Ranger Mark Lilly, includes one sentence that stands out: "Avoid placing volunteers near 42B until communication inconsistency is addressed." The memo was never released to the public. One of the most unusual pieces of evidence comes from a home video recorded by a retired teacher named Harold Baines on the 8th of September 2006. He entered the park alone, carrying a small camera and an older handheld recorder. The footage begins calmly, showing slow shots of the forest. Baines speaks in a flat, peaceful tone, describing the slope of the trail and the colour of the rock underfoot. When he reaches the ridgeline, he pauses and says, "Strange." The air feels before the audio breaks. There is no pop or distortion. The sound ends sharply, and it does not return for the rest of the recording. Baines vanished that same afternoon. The official report suggested he fell into the nearby ravine, though the deepest drop is only 12 feet. Search teams found no imprint or disturbed soil in the area. A ranger, quoted anonymously in a 2013 local article, said, "Everyone knew he didn't fall. We checked every inch." The article was later removed from the paper's website. In 2011, Dr. Samuel Avery, a geologist from the State University, collected readings across the ridgeline without notifying the park in advance. His instruments detected irregular electromagnetic fluctuations across a span of roughly 300 meters, the pattern repeated twice. When he sent his findings to park management, he received a brief reply from Supervisor Richard Hall. Not applicable to current operations. No further review needed. Avery insisted the data should have triggered a full geological survey, but none was scheduled. Hall retired 3 months later. Older Ranger logs carry another repeated note. Many entries use the phrase, "unexpected quiet." On the 2nd of August 1987, Ranger Timothy Shaw wrote, "Entered 42B during afternoon patrol. Sound dampened. No birds. No wind behavior to match silence. Recommend sound readings." Shaw's request was never followed. He passed away in 1992, and his notes remain one of the earliest suggestions that the area behaved differently long before Greer's disappearance. The silence was not only reported by staff. In 2018, a group of 3 hikers completed a voluntary visitor statement after a long walk near the West Trail. They wrote that the forest sounded blank, as if every natural sound had been switched off. The silence lasted only a few minutes before returning to normal patterns. The park log does not include this detail, though the hikers insisted it was the reason they cut their trip short. A maintenance worker named Jonah Reeves added another layer to the picture. On the 15th of October 2020, he wrote in his personal journal, later shared by his family, "Radios shut down again near the ridge. Tried 3, all dead in the same place. Don't want to work up there anymore." Reeves was not part of Ranger operations, meaning his account came without internal pressure or policy restrictions. The pattern expanded again in 2022 when several visitors posted online about compass disturbances. One hiker reported, "Compass needle spun in a slow circle for 20 seconds, then pointed southwest while facing north." The park responded by stating, "Magnetic variations are normal in wilderness terrain, but older geological surveys list no magnetic material in the ridgeline region. None of the survey maps show conditions that would cause compass interference. There are also cases of physical markings appearing without explanation." In 1997, a ranger named Alicia Romero logged 2 burn marks on tree trunks near the ridge. She wrote, "Marks precise, not consistent with lightning." Her supervisor added a short note attempting to dismiss the observation, likely old burn pattern resurfacing. Romero's photos were placed in the archive, but went missing from the file in 2008. No request for removal was logged. Another small note came from a volunteer known only by the initials DM in a sign in booklet from 1997. He wrote, "Heard something metallic. Pattern too regular for tools." The top edge of that page shows a crease, as if someone attempted to tear it out. His name never appeared in the volunteer database for that year. Across all these accounts, none of the individuals described panic or fear. Each entry reflects plain observation. A radio drops its signal, a recorder loses sound, a compass spins slowly. A section of forest becomes too quiet for its own landscape. These notes are scattered in different folders, added across different decades, each written by a different person. When placed together, they reveal a long, steady pattern that has never been acknowledged openly. Today, rangers rarely speak about Section 42B unless directly questioned. When asked, they often say the terrain is unstable or that the vegetation needs restoration. Yet no records show erosion, contamination, or structural problems. The trail remains accessible, but fewer people take it now. The ones who do sometimes describe the same thin stillness others noticed years ago. The ridgeline remains unchanged, carrying its quiet reports and missing signals into each new year. It stands as a place where transmissions fade, sound thins, and the park's official story stays silent. The night the calls looped, the incident took place on the 14th of October 2009 during a late-season search for a missing camper named Daniel Rowe. He had entered Pine Haven National Park 3 days earlier using the South Meadow Trail, leaving a brief note with the ranger station that he planned to photograph the upper valley before rain moved in. When he failed to return, rangers began a standard grid search. Nothing in the first hours appeared unusual. Teams followed the creek line, checked the old fire road, and reviewed weather shifts from the previous night. But just after sunset, the dispatch center at North Gate recorded a series of emergency calls that shaped the operation in a way no one present has been able to fully explain. The dispatch logs show the first call appeared at 6:51 p.m. It came through the primary rescue channel, a frequency used only by ranger teams. The voice on the call was faint but clear enough to make out some words. A dispatcher named Karen Holt wrote them down as she heard them. "North Ridge, help, something's wrong." Holt noted the voice sounded male but strained. She could not identify if it belonged to any ranger. Standard protocol required that she radio back for identification. She did. The reply never came. The line went silent. At 6:58 p.m., the same call played again. Not a similar call, an identical one. Holt later explained that the pacing matched perfectly, down to the way the voice clipped slightly on the word wrong. She compared the two recordings side by side. They lined up. This time, she radioed all active search teams to confirm whether any ranger had attempted a distress call. No one had. Every team reported stable conditions, clear communication, and normal positioning. None were near the North Ridge mentioned in the call. Rain began to fall around 7:10 p.m., covering the forest floor in a soft hiss. Rangers said the sound made it harder to hear movements in the dark. Holt wrote that the calls gave her a steady sense of watching a clock that was out of order. She shared the concern with her supervisor, Ranger Bill Carter, who instructed teams closest to the northern route to shift their search for safety reasons. His log reads, "Investigate possible injured party near North Ridge. Source unclear." The third call arrived at 7:14 p.m. It was identical again. Same voice, same weakened tone, same order of words. The timestamp placed it 16 minutes after the first call, but the audio showed no difference. Ranger Carter entered the dispatch room to listen. He made Holt play all three recordings back to back. He later described the experience to another ranger in a statement recorded months later. "It was like hearing a loop, not an echo, a loop, same person, same breath, same pause." Teams reached the northern ridgeline at approximately 7:40 p.m. The area was steep but navigable. Rain struck the rocks in thin sheets, giving them a muted shine. Rangers spread out in pairs and checked tree clusters, drainage holes, and the old survey marker placed there in 1975. They found no footprints, no broken branches, no gear, and no sign that anyone had been there. They attempted to call dispatch several times, but the first few attempts did not go through. When contact resumed, the line felt thin, as if carrying less signal strength than usual. At 8:06 p.m., the fourth transmission played. Holt noted it as "call hashful, identical to previous." By this time, she had saved each recording and compared their sound waves. All four matched exactly. The shape, as shown on her old monitor, reflected the same peaks and dips, suggesting they were not repeated live, but copied from a single source. However, no system within the dispatch center was capable of replaying calls on its own. The equipment installed in 2007 had no automatic playback function. It also had no audio buffer large enough to store emergency calls for automatic reissue. Ranger Carter advised her to route the channel through the backup receiver. She did. Even on the backup, the call repeated at 8:19 p.m., then again at 8:35 p.m. The interval length changed slightly, but the audio itself never changed. Holt wrote, 6 repeats, all same pattern, no caller verified. The strangest part came when Carter tried to trace the call's source. The park's repeater tower on Ridge Point should have logged any incoming transmission. When Carter checked the tower report the next morning, there were no entries at any of the timestamps. The logs were blank from 6:30 p.m. to 9 p.m. The tower showed activity earlier that day and after those hours, but nothing inside the window when the calls were heard. The rain stopped around 9:15 p.m. Ground teams returned to base by 10:05 p.m., tired and muddy. As they checked in, Holt played the recordings to see if anyone recognized the voice. Most said it did not match any ranger they knew. One ranger, whose name was removed from the final report, said the voice sounded off, as if recorded in a room without air. The calls ended at 10:12 p.m. There was no final message, no sign-off. The last entry in Holt's log reads, "Transmission ceased. No additional audio." The park filed the incident as equipment malfunction, yet the equipment had been tested 3 times the next morning, and no malfunctions were detected. Daniel Rowe's disappearance remained unsolved. His camera, when later recovered half a mile south of the search area, contained 2 photos taken near dusk. The first showed the outline of the valley. The second was too dark to make out. Below the second image, the camera displayed a corrupted timestamp reading, bark. In 2012, a technician who had serviced the dispatch center that same year wrote a private email to a colleague. In it, he described the 2009 recordings as clean duplicates with no degradation. He added, "Only way that happens is if something broadcasts a recording, not a live call." His message ended with a line that was later quoted online. The park blamed the radios, but the radios weren't the thing misbehaving. The repeated calls never appeared in the park's public incident summaries. Visitors who read about the row case online will not see any mention of them. The recordings still exist, but they are stored in a separate folder marked Atypical Events, a label added years after the original incident. Most rangers, hired after 2015, have never heard them. Even today, dispatchers occasionally mention hearing faint cross-channel noise near the same frequency used during Rowe's search. They describe it as a thin sound, almost like someone breathing too close to a microphone. It never forms words. It lasts a second at most before fading again. The night of the looping calls remains one of the park's most quietly discussed incidents. It lives in copies of logs, in audio files tucked away in a side drawer, and in the memory of the few rangers who were present. There is no official explanation, the timestamps never aligned, and the voice that asked for help has never been identified. The pattern under the pines. The clusters appeared slowly, almost too slowly, for anyone to notice. When early rangers logged missing hikers in the 1,970 seconds and 1,980 seconds, they treated each case as an isolated event. The forest was large, the terrain uneven, and people often strayed from marked trails. It was only after the archive room was reorganized in 2003 that the older case maps were laid flat and compared with newer ones. A ranger named Ellen Pierce is credited with first noticing the alignment. She ran a thin pencil line through several points and found that 6 disappearances, 4 signal failures, and 2 unsolved rescue calls all fell within a narrow strip of land just east of the oldest pine stands. The corridor, as it came to be called inside staff meetings, runs less than a mile long. It tilts slightly northeast, following no natural path, waterline, or ridge formation. Its width remains consistent, roughly 40 yards in most places. The strange part is that it does not align with any official park trail, yet visitors unknowingly cross segments of it whenever they wander slightly off the mapped routes. The pines here grow taller than average and carry a heavier canopy, giving the forest floor an even, dim shade at most times of day. One of the earliest disappearances pinned within this corridor belongs to a hiker named Martha Whitmore, who went missing on the 11th of July, 1978. Her case file includes a hand-drawn map marking her last known location. When Pierce overlaid the page on a modern grid, Whitmore's mark fell directly over the southern edge of the corridor. The file includes a brief ranger remark: "Birds unusually silent. Search team noted lack of echo near clearing." That remark was never expanded upon. In April 1985, 2 trail surveyors, Grant Lewis and Rachel O'Hara, ventured into this same area to update measurements for a new footpath proposal. Their radio transmissions grew unstable around 3:20 p.m., cutting in and out in steady pulses. O'Hara later wrote, "Signal behaved mechanically, like something turning a knob." When they returned to base, the supervisor reviewed the logs and dismissed the interference as weather-related. Even though the afternoon sky had remained clear, their incident was filed without follow-up. As Pierce continued mapping old records, she noticed another odd match. A 1,992 wildlife report noted that deer tracks seemed to disappear for 10 to 15 feet before reappearing farther ahead. The ranger who wrote the report added a confused line: "No sign of direction change, no sign of leap marks." Though the observation was intended for wildlife tracking research, its coordinates placed it squarely inside the corridor. In 2007, a group of 3 geology students from Riverbend College entered the park to study soil layers for a class project. They stood inside the corridor without knowing it. Their notes include a comment about compasses spinning for several seconds and an observation that the ground felt softer than expected, even though the soil was dry. One student, Michael Tran, later wrote in a campus newspaper article that the sight made him feel like standing in a room with the windows shut. The article was removed from the online archive in 2015 after site updates. In 2014, Pinehaven began testing a new type of handheld locator beacon for ranger patrols. The device used satellite triangulation rather than radio towers. During a demonstration in early June, Ranger Harold Klein walked through the corridor while carrying one of the beacons. The device recorded his position correctly until he reached a cluster of older pines. The coordinates then froze, holding the same location for nearly 3 minutes while Klein continued walking. When he reached sunlight again, the beacon resumed normal function. Klein's file includes a short note: "GS stall, not reproducible." Where these points align, the forest feels different. Hikers often describe the air as thicker or still. One couple reported that voices sounded muted when they attempted to call to each other over a short distance. Not an echo, they wrote. More like our words slowed down. The park did not include this statement in the final report. A retired ranger named Paul Carden, who worked at Pinehaven for 26 years, spoke about the corridor once during an interview recorded for a local radio program in 2019. His voice stayed calm as he described patrols through that area in the 1,990 seconds. He said, "You'd walk through it, and the forest would behave different, not in a dramatic way, just different. Birds wouldn't sing. You'd hear your footsteps more than usual." When asked why the park never addressed these patterns publicly, he paused before saying, "Not everything needs an explanation to be ignored." In 2020, staff digitizing old maps discovered an even older sketch dated 1964. The paper was fragile, with faded pencil lines tracing uneven trees and rock shapes. A ranger named Jim Harlow had drawn it during a preliminary survey before the park became official land. Near the center of the map, he had shaded a narrow path of trees and written a small note. "Odd quiet here. It is the earliest known mention of the corridor, predating all missing person reports." When modern teams attempted to study the corridor again in 2021, they found it difficult to reproduce any anomalies. Radios worked normally during the tests, and animal activity appeared typical. Yet 2 rangers reported something subtle. Sound seemed to move differently. One ranger, Alex Warren, wrote in the daily log, "Voices carried less distance than expected." Another ranger said that the wind flattened as it passed through the pine branches. Despite the reluctance to focus on this narrow strip of land, the internal maps still show the pattern clearly. When all the relevant case markers are placed together, disappearances, failed signals, missing photographs, stalled jeeps readings, they gather neatly inside the same corridor. None of the outlying events fall outside it by more than a few yards. The alignment is too precise to dismiss entirely, though no ranger has officially acknowledged it. Visitors who walk near this area often describe a sensation of moving through 2 different spaces at once, though they struggle to explain what that means. Their words appear in the visitor statements as quiet observations, not dramatic claims. "Trail felt longer than usual. Light looked strange under the trees. Thought I heard someone behind me. No one there. The corridor under the pines carries no signposts and holds no warnings. It is not closed to the public. It is simply part of the forest, stretching the same way it has for decades. Yet its pattern exists on the maps, on the logs, and in the steady notes made by people who walked it before any explanation was offered." As each new year adds another report or another quiet detail, the corridor continues to shape a story that the park has never officially recognized. The clearing that moves. The clearing first appeared in ranger notes from the summer of 1981. At that time, Pinehaven National Park was still expanding its boundaries, and many of the trails were only partially mapped. A seasonal ranger named David Coleman wrote a short line in his June patrol log, "New clearing near East Loop, not on survey map, will update coordinates." His description was brief. He mentioned knee-high grass, a ring of thin saplings, and soil that looked recently turned over. When he returned to the same spot a week later, the clearing was gone. In its place stood an unbroken wall of mature pines. Coleman believed he had mistaken the location, but when he attempted to correct his earlier entry, he found that the map grid could not match the terrain. More sightings followed over the years, though they were rarely discussed. In 1986, a pair of hikers from Washington State claimed they stepped into a wide-open spot where the ground felt warmer than the forest floor around it. They said the clearing looked fresh, as if nothing had ever grown there. When they reported it to a ranger, they pointed to a location nearly 300 yards from the place Coleman had marked. The ranger wrote their statement down and filed it with the general incident reports. No follow-up account exists. The clearing emerged again in 1990 during a survey for a new emergency access route. A field technician named Carla Mendez recorded the site in a notebook that was later scanned into the digital archive. She drew a rough sketch, an oval shape with uneven edges, surrounded by trees that appeared younger than the rest of the forest. She wrote, "Area does not match last year's vegetation pattern. Soil unusually loose." When her team returned in October, they could not find the clearing. Instead, they found older, thicker pines than the sketch suggested. One technician remarked, "Looks like it's been here for decades." No one could explain the mismatch. In 1999, a search and rescue team mentioned the clearing during the search for a missing boy, one 2-year-old Evan Harris. Heavy rain obscured footprints, and the team spread out across the central forest. One ranger, Daniel Horecki, wrote later that he passed through an open area with no underbrush, like a cut field. He marked the location on his emergency map. When other team members checked the coordinates an hour later, no clearing could be found. Horecki insisted the opening had been there. I walked through it, 15 seconds across. Sky was fully visible. His log entry was never added to the final public summary. Some of the most detailed accounts came from 2004, when 3 birdwatchers visited the park in early September. They reported stepping into a clearing with a perfect circle of bare soil. They stayed for several minutes, noting how the air felt still and heavy. One of them, a woman named Helen Rhodes, later told a local newspaper that the place felt like something had pushed the trees out of the way. When rangers checked the site 2 days later, all they found were continuous pines, with no break in the canopy. The newspaper's article referred to the incident as visitor misnavigation. The inconsistency deepened in 2010, when park maintenance worker Jordan Ellis sent a photo to his supervisor. The image showed a patch of ground with no trees, just compact soil and a few small rocks. The sun cut through overhead, creating a soft ring of light. Ellis wrote, "This is between markers 17 and 18. Shouldn't be." When he returned the next morning, the clearing was no longer present. His photo is still stored in the digital archive, but the GPS data attached to it does not match any coordinate inside the park boundaries. The metadata places the photo 0.7 miles east of the closest boundary fence, in an area with no road access. One of the more unusual reports occurred in August 2015. A biology teacher named Mark Doherty visited Pinehaven with 2 students on a field study. They described walking into a clearing where the air seemed too warm for shade. Doherty said the place felt out of place, like it didn't belong to this forest. When they checked their map, they found that the clearing sat directly over a location marked as dense woodland. As they walked out and circled back 15 minutes later, the clearing had vanished. The students believed they had simply miscounted their steps. Doherty remained unsure. The last major account came in October 2020. 2 campers from Idaho took a wrong turn while returning to their site and wandered into what they described as a silent, wide-open field with light that didn't match the weather. The sky above them looked pale and flat, even though the rest of the forest was under thick cloud cover. They claimed the clearing felt unnaturally level, as if the ground had been pressed down. They stayed for less than a minute before hurrying back toward the trail. When they showed rangers the location, nothing resembled the place they described. The ground was uneven, and the trees were tall enough to block most of the light. Across all these accounts, one pattern repeats. The clearing appears where no clearing exists, then disappears before anyone can document it twice from the same position. The vegetation surrounding it seems to change in age and density, depending on who reports it. In several cases, coordinates provided by witnesses show the clearing in places that do not overlap at all. In others, the coordinates nearly match, but differ just enough to prevent confirmation. Rangers who worked in the 1,990 seconds spoke quietly about the clearing during staff meetings, calling it the moving patch. They did not assign it an official label. They treated it as an oddity, something to note but not investigate. Ranger Coleman, who first recorded the clearing in 1981, once remarked in an interview that the forest never stayed still in that spot. His comment was not included in the final transcript. Some search teams now choose to avoid the central section of the corridor when organizing morning sweeps. They cite thick brush or low visibility as the reason, even though maps show normal ground cover. The clearing, whether real or misremembered, has shaped how rangers divide search grids. Its presence moves through the forest in scattered reports, emerging and vanishing without leaving physical evidence behind. Those who step into it describe the same feeling, a sense that the forest briefly rearranged itself. They report quiet air, bright patches of light, and ground that seems recently disturbed. They do not describe fear, they do not describe urgency. They speak as if the clearing was simply part of the landscape, even though it does not belong to any known map. And as more reports accumulate through the years, the clearing continues to surface where no clearing should exist. The tree with no shadow. The earliest reference to the shadowless pine appears in a single-line note written by Ranger Philip Carver on the 22nd of March, 1984. His log entry reads, "Tall pine near creek, bend casts no shadow at noon." No additional details were provided. Carver was known for brief but accurate observations, and his records rarely contained exaggeration. When later rangers reviewed his logs, they assumed he had misjudged the light or recorded the wrong time. The note stayed buried in a folder for nearly 20 years before another ranger documented something similar in the same area. That second account came from Ranger Elise Donner in 2003. She mentioned a tree near the same creek bend, describing it as unusually tall with smooth bark compared to the others. Donner wrote that she checked the ground at 11:58 a.m. and saw less shadow than expected, almost as though the tree absorbed the light rather than blocking it. She thought her eyes were adjusting to glare and left the area without further inspection. Her report ended with the line, "We'll revisit at different hour." There is no record that she did. The strangest evidence arrived in 2009 from a pair of hikers, James and Lorna Hill, who carried a digital camera. They took a photograph of a pine standing in an open patch of forest surrounded by smaller trees. The sun, angled sharply from the west, cast long shadows behind every tree except one. The tall pine at the center of the image showed a faint blur on the ground, not a defined shadow. The hills told rangers that the shadow looked too soft, almost smudged. The image metadata confirmed it was taken at 4:39 p.m. in clear light. Rangers reviewed the photo, then told the couple the shadow must have been obscured by uneven ground. But when the couple returned to the same site the next morning, the forest layout did not match their photo. In 2011, a maintenance worker named Luke Pritchard mentioned the tree during a repair job on a nearby drainage line. He wrote a short note in his daily sheet. Same pine carver mentioned, bark smooth, no bottom shadow around noon. Pritchard's supervisor added a clarification in the margin, stating, likely angle misread, and closed the report. Yet Pritchard mentioned the tree again in 2013 during a routine safety meeting. He said the spot felt off, as if the light there moved differently than in the rest of the forest. His co-workers remembered the remark because Pritchard was not known for unusual observations. A more detailed record came in 2015 from visitor statements. A group of college students hiking along the creek said they noticed the sun shining directly on a tall tree, but the ground below remained evenly lit, as though no object blocked the light. They circled the pine twice and found the same effect. One student tried to stand in the shadow herself, but the ground did not darken beneath her feet. The ranger who took their report dismissed it as a matter of angle and perception. When the students asked if the tree had been logged in ranger notes before, the ranger told them no, even though Carver's 1984 entry referenced the same location. Photos submitted over the years show inconsistencies. Some depict a clear shadow, others show none. A few show fragmented patterns where the tree's outline appears but breaks apart as it stretches across the ground. In one 2017 photo taken by a jogger named Samuel Choi, the tree's shadow appears to tilt toward the creek even though the sun was behind him. His phone timestamp and compass direction confirmed that the shadow should have fallen in the opposite direction. Choi returned a week later to take another picture. That time, the shadow behaved normally. In 2018, ranger interns conducted a light reading test in the area as part of a training exercise. They set up 3 markers around the pine, believed to be the one described in older logs. Each marker tracked how much light hit the ground at specific angles. The readings at markers 1 and 2 were consistent with normal midday conditions. Marker 3, placed closest to the tree's base, showed an unexpected result, a brief dip in recorded light levels at 12:03 p.m. Instead of showing lower levels from shadow cover, the meter captured a uniform reading that suggested the light around the tree remained even. The supervising ranger wrote, "Test inconclusive, could not replicate." The idea of a shadowless pine became a quiet subject among rangers. Some believed the effect came from subtle terrain curves that bent the light. Others blamed the dense canopy, even though the tall pine stood in a relatively open patch. A few speculated that the tree itself might not be the constant element, that perhaps multiple similar trees stood near the creek, confusing observers over time. But the logs suggest a more consistent pattern. The coordinates from observations spanning decades fall within a tight radius of 40 yards. The tree might not be the same, but the location always is. In 2020, a trail runner named Megan Ortiz brought new attention to the phenomenon. She used a wearable camera that captured her route along the creek. In one frame, she passed the pine at 3:12 p.m. The video showed the shadows of nearby trees stretching across the trail, but the pine she passed threw a narrow shadow that flickered as if broken into pieces. When Ortiz slowed the video frame by frame, the shadow appeared to shift shape, shrinking and widening in unnatural ways. Park officials reviewed the footage, but could not determine whether it was caused by camera artifacts or something else. What makes the shadowless pine notable is not the dramatic nature of the reports. None describe fear, danger, or anything threatening. Instead, each account states the observation plainly. The light does not behave normally in that small section of forest. Sometimes the tree casts a faint shadow. Sometimes it casts none at all. Sometimes the shadow looks fractured or angled in the wrong direction. Across 4 decades of scattered notes, the same detail repeats quietly. The area around the creek bend remains open to visitors with no warnings posted. The pine blends with others nearby and carries no visible marks. Yet those who notice the discrepancy remember it with certainty. They often describe the moment as simple and unremarkable, something noticed in passing before moving on, a shadow that should have been there but wasn't, a shape that should have stretched across the ground but didn't follow the rules of sunlight. As with the other anomalies inside Pinehaven, the tree with no shadow exists mostly in small references and understated reports. It never appears in public summaries or visitor guides, but the logs preserve it piece by piece, building a long record of light behaving differently in one small place beneath the pines. The map that changed itself. The oldest surviving map of Pinehaven dates back to 1962, drafted by surveyor Alan Creighton. It is a rough drawing printed on yellowing paper, showing ridgelines, creek bends, and proposed trail routes. For decades, rangers treated it as a reference for historical comparison, not as an active navigation tool. Yet when the archives were reorganized in 2003, a ranger named Ellen Pierce placed the 1962 map beside newer editions and noticed something that did not match. A trail that appeared in Creighton's draft, a narrow eastbound route following the creek, was missing from the 1978 and 1985 maps. Not removed, not rerouted. Missing entirely, the land it should have crossed was shown as unbroken forest. Pierce initially assumed the old map contained early plans that were never realized, but her notes from that day reveal uncertainty. She wrote, "Creighton's trail marked as completed, not proposed. Section shows distance markers." The 1962 map included hand-drawn elevation marks and rest points, signs that someone had walked the route. Yet no ranger logs from the era mention construction or closure. The trail simply vanishes from later records. In 1991, a hiker named Carol Ventnor approached a ranger station with a torn photocopy of a map she found in a second-hand bookstore. It showed a looping trail on the northwest ridge that she said matched neither the official maps nor the terrain she walked. She claimed she had tried to follow the loop, but reached a dead-end wall of trees where the map showed an open overlook. Her written statement says, "Either the trail was erased or the map is wrong." Rangers filed her report, but dismissed the map as outdated. Years later, Pierce compared Ventnor's copy with several official maps and found that the ridge loop appeared on one map from 1971, then disappeared entirely in the next printing in 1974. In 2004, during a fire prevention project, crews uncovered a metal trail marker deep inside the forest. The marker showed the number 19 and an arrow pointing east. The problem was that Trail 19 had never extended into that part of the park. Its route existed entirely along the southern ridge, miles away from where the marker was found. Rangers checked the archives to confirm, but no version of the map placed Trail 19 anywhere near the location of the discovery. The marker was old, rusted, and firmly anchored in the soil. Its presence suggested that a trail once passed through the area, though no current or past map supported this. In 2009, a seasonal ranger named Thomas Newton conducted a personal project aligning every edition of the Pinehaven map chronologically on large transparent sheets. When he layered them together, he noticed that the positions of certain bends and slopes shifted by small degrees between prints, not enough to suggest deliberate redrawing, but enough to create discrepancies. A hillside that leaned west in the 1980 edition leaned slightly north in the 1990 version. A creek line drawn straight in 1975 curved subtly in 1993. These minor changes were never recorded in official revision logs, which normally documented even small adjustments. Newton showed his findings to his supervisor, who told him, "Land shift, measurements improve." Still, Newton noted that the scale markers remained identical in each edition, meaning the adjustments could not be explained by improved measurement methods alone. The pattern became more pronounced in 2015, when the park finally digitized all physical maps. During the process, a technician named Laura Kim discovered that two maps from 1988 contained different trails, even though they were printed only weeks apart. One showed a narrow connector path between Ridge Trail and North Loop, while the other omitted it completely. The date, print batch, and scale matched, yet the contents differed. The park attributed the inconsistency to a printing error, but Kim later wrote in an internal email that the digital scans showed no signs of altered plates or ink mismatch. They look like two maps from two different parks, she wrote. Visitors have occasionally mentioned map inconsistencies without realizing the depth of the issue. In 2017, a family hiking the West Trail returned to the ranger station to report that the trail forked unexpectedly, even though the official map showed a single path. They described a clean, obvious split, with one direction leading uphill and the other continuing straight. When rangers checked the site the next day, the fork was gone. The trail was single and uninterrupted. In 2019, a high school teacher leading a student group mapped a route using a GPS device and later compared the track to the official park map. The GPS path overlapped with a faint trail that appeared on a map from 1982, but not on any editions printed after 1990. He shared his GPS data with the park, but the park responded with a short note. Current maps reflect present trail conditions. The trail on the 1982 map was labeled Creek Access, though no creek lies in that part of the forest today. A more unusual case surfaced in 2021 when two backpackers reported that they reached an overlook marked on their map, only to find themselves standing in dense woods with no visible opening. The coordinates they provided matched an overlook printed on a 1995 map, but removed from all versions after 2002. The area in question is now covered by trees estimated to be at least 60 years old, based on trunk diameter. Rangers checking the site later confirmed that there is no clearing and no drop in elevation where the overlook was shown. Across these accounts, one theme stays consistent. The maps do not match each other, nor do they always match the physical terrain. Some trails appear in older versions, only to vanish in newer ones. Some terrain features shift subtly from edition to edition. A few landmarks like the Creek Access Path and the Ridge Loop appear in mid-century maps and then disappear altogether, erased without explanation. Rangers rarely talk about the discrepancies. When asked, they emphasize the difficulty of mapping wilderness terrain and the natural changes that forests undergo. But the archived map suggests something different. Many changes do not reflect erosion, climate patterns, or natural growth. Instead, they resemble the shifting of pieces that should be fixed paths that move, clearings that migrate, boundaries that bend slightly year after year. The maps hang now in a cabinet at the back of the ranger station, arranged neatly in chronological order. Their lines, when compared carefully, tell a story the park has never officially acknowledged. The land inside Pinehaven appears to rearrange itself in small, quiet ways, too subtle to draw attention but too consistent to ignore. Each edition marks a different version of the forest, as though the terrain has been recorded from slightly altered perspectives, and the maps, unchanged since their printing, continue to shift only in memory, except for the ones that show trails no one can find anymore. The footsteps that never arrived. The first documented case of disappearing footprints in Pinehaven appears in a 1976 wildlife log authored by Ranger Howard Nexton. He recorded tracking a small herd of mule deer along a soft patch of earth near the western slope. The prints were clear, recent, spaced evenly. Then, according to his note, tracks ended on level ground. No rocks, no roots, no sudden incline. Nexton circled the area twice and found nothing to suggest the deer had leapt or changed direction. His final line reads, "Animals don't stop walking mid-stride." The entry, tucked between notes on weather and water levels, went unnoticed for decades. The phenomenon reappeared in 1982 during a spring search for two hikers from Nevada. Search teams followed their shoe impressions through damp soil left from overnight rain. The prints traveled in a predictable line until they reached a clearing. There, the impressions simply stopped. Not faded, not washed away, stopped. A volunteer named Karen Blight described the moment in her statement. "It was as if they stepped onto air." Rangers marked the location, but later reports described the disappearance of the hikers as inconclusive, with no mention of the abrupt ending of their tracks. In 1991, a wildlife biologist named Dr. Henry Lang conducted a small study on animal migration within the park. One of his students tracked a solitary cougar based on paw prints found along a muddy slope. The prints continued for 300 yards before ending cleanly on a dry patch of forest floor. Lang took soil samples and tested for compression changes, concluding that the ground showed no disturbance beyond the last visible print. His study was submitted to the park office, but only the migration data, not the anomalous tracks, was included in the final report. A more detailed account surfaced in 1997. A father and his 2 teenage sons were hiking the southern loop when they noticed a series of human footprints leading toward a narrow grove of pines. The prints, well defined and set at an even stride, continued until they reached a cluster of fallen needles. From there, nothing. The father later wrote, "We expected to see more prints just beyond the needles, but the ground was clean, untouched." When they reported it, the ranger attributed the disappearance to shifting pine debris, although the family insisted the ground beyond the needles was bare and dry. Their statement remained in the visitor log, but was never moved to the incident file. In 2006, during the well-documented search for missing teacher Harold Baines, a team located a line of footprints believed to be his. They led toward the same ridgeline where his audio had failed earlier that day. The prints were deep and fresh in moist soil, but when the team walked another 15 meters, the tracks vanished on a patch of flat, compact earth. Ranger notes from that day include the line, "Tracks terminate abruptly, no slide marks, no directional change." This detail was not included in the public summary. The pattern continued quietly over the years. In 2012, a group of 3 backpackers reported finding a fresh set of barefoot prints in a patch of soft earth near a bend in the creek. The prints were unusual broad, with a long stride, not matching any member of the group. They followed the trail for nearly 20 yards before the prints ended at a cluster of smooth stones. The stones showed no mud transfer, no impact marks, and no surrounding debris. When rangers checked the site later, the prints had faded due to wind, and no formal investigation was made. One of the most compelling accounts comes from 2016, when a visiting wildlife tracker, Megan Halley, documented a pattern she had never seen in her 12-year career. She followed a set of coyote prints that led through a hollow of dry leaves. The prints appeared crisp and recent. As she moved forward, she found that the impressions gradually became shallower and then stopped altogether, not due to terrain change, but at the midpoint of a flat, open space. She wrote, "There should have been at least 5 more steps. The pattern ends mid-gate." Her field report was later shared online, though the park did not comment on it. In 2018, 2 search and rescue volunteers experienced the phenomenon directly. They tracked prints believed to belong to a lost hiker along the northern corridor. The prints followed a clear direction until they reached a small depression in the ground. Inside the depression, the soil was soft enough to capture deep impressions, but the prints stopped at the depression's center. One volunteer described it as walking into a footprint that never finished being made. The team flagged the area, but rain later erased the tracks before they could be redocumented. In 2020, a ranger trainee named Luis Ortega observed a fresh set of prints while conducting a routine sweep. The impressions belonged to a small animal, likely a fox, and led straight across a lightly frosted field. The fox's prints ended halfway across, with no sign of bounding, turning, or doubling back. Ortega stood at the point where the prints ended and looked outward, expecting to see a new direction. There was nothing. He wrote in his log, "Can't explain termination. Ground smooth for 10 feet ahead." When he asked senior rangers about the phenomenon, he was told that incomplete tracks were a known quirk of this district, though no training manual ever referenced such a matter. Several documented cases show the same pattern, footprints that end mid-stride on level ground with no nearby obstacles, no soil change, and no signs of disturbance. In some cases, the final print appears deeper, as though more weight had been applied. In others, the final print appears lighter, as if the subject was taking a precise step onto something that did not exist. There is no consistent weather pattern linked to these events. They occur in spring mud, autumn leaves, winter frost, and summer dust. They involve humans, deer, foxes, coyotes, and once, in 1999, a set of unidentified impressions that did not match any catalogued wildlife in the region. A brief internal note on those prints reads, "Shape unusual, not consistent, refer to wildlife specialist." The note ends there. Rangers rarely mention disappearing prints to visitors, though the search teams know the reports well. Some call them vanish points, others call them null zones. A ranger who worked the park in the late 90s once said during a closed training session, "People walk into that part of the forest and sometimes leave no trace not because they don't leave prints, but because the prints decide not to continue. The phenomenon has never appeared in public reports. It remains one of Pinehaven's quiet anomalies, recorded in logs and field notes but never placed into official summaries. The footprints that never arrived continue to line the edges of the park's missing person cases, repeating a pattern that grows more defined with every decade. Tracks that should continue, but instead end cleanly on level ground, leaving empty space where movement should be. The fog that listens. The first report of the listening fog comes from a visitor statement dated the 3rd of October 1979. A couple walking the lower valley noted a dense patch of fog sitting low to the ground. They wrote that the fog was quiet but thick, forming a circular shape no wider than 30 feet. What made them approach it was the way sound behaved. According to their statement, footsteps echoed before they were made. When the man spoke, he claimed he heard his voice twice, once ahead, once behind. They left quickly and did not re-enter the bank. Rangers listed their account as environmental distortion. The second record appeared 8 years later, in 1987. A field biologist named Leonard Shaw mentioned a fog patch that did not match weather conditions. Shaw's notes describe a soft white mass settled between two fir trees, unmoving despite normal airflow. When Shaw stepped near it, he wrote that the forest grew too quiet, as though the fog formed a barrier that muffled everything outside while amplifying what was inside. He tapped his clipboard once, and the sound returned to him with a delay that did not match the distance. Shaw's superior dismissed the note as temperature inversion. In 1993, 3 hikers on the ridge path encountered a similar formation. One of them, a man named Peter Ralston, wrote in the visitor book that the fog responded to noise. He described whispering something to his wife, then hearing the same whisper repeated from the opposite direction. When the group called out to determine if someone else stood nearby, their voices came back muted, clipped, and shifted. Ralston compared it to hearing ourselves through a long tunnel. They left the area without further exploration. Ranger logs from that day include the line, "Hikers confused by echo." No fog was recorded in the weather log. The phenomenon expanded in documentation by 2002. A backcountry photographer named Alison Green claimed she entered a fog pocket near the southern ridge during late afternoon, even though the rest of the forest was clear. In an interview later transcribed by staff, Green described hearing soft tapping sounds that matched the pattern of her own footsteps but played slightly ahead of her movements. When she paused, the tapping stopped. When she stepped forward again, she reported hearing the tap of her next step before her foot reached the ground. Her camera footage captured only white haze and faint, distorted audio. The park kept her footage but released no statement. One of the most detailed ranger encounters occurred in 2007 when Ranger Louis McConnell logged a fog cluster forming suddenly along a dry creek bed during daylight. He noted no moisture in the air before the fog appeared. His description is brief but unusual. Fog rose from ground in circle. Sound inside carried strangely. Heard something shift, though nothing there. McConnell later commented during an internal meeting that voices sounded layered, as if conversations overlapped but none were happening. His report was filed under environmental anomaly with no request for follow-up. In 2013, a school group visiting the park reported a sound distortion near the central corridor. One student claimed she whispered her friend's name and heard it whispered back from the fog, even though her friend stood beside her. The teacher, accompanying them, described the phenomenon as uncertain echoes, which prompted the ranger on duty to attribute the effect to the acoustics of a low valley pocket. Yet the location they described does not match any valley. It is flat ground. The fog's behaviour became more widely recognised among staff after a 2016 missing person search. During the operation, a team encountered a fog bank near the boundary of Section 42B. One member, identified in logs only as RJ, described stepping into the fog and hearing the radio static repeat itself in gentle pulses, almost rhythmic. He reported hearing the search captain's voice call his own name, even though the captain later confirmed he never made such a call. Log entries from the night include sound distorted inside fog, team withdrew. The phenomenon was noted but not included in the public summary. In 2018, a trail runner named Cynthia Lowe uploaded a short video to social media. She had been training along Pinehaven's northern loop when she encountered a small fog column near the edge of the trail. Her video shows a white, unmoving mass against an otherwise clear forest backdrop. As she approaches, Her breathing echoes in the video twice, then again, each time softer than the last. The fog dissipates abruptly midway through the recording, but the delayed breathing continues for several seconds after the fog has vanished. The park sent her a polite message thanking her for the footage but offered no comment. The video was later removed for unknown reasons. In 2021, 2 campers from Utah described a late-night encounter with fog that they claimed listened to them. They said the fog formed silently between their tents while they were preparing food. When one camper dropped a spoon, the clatter echoed back softly before it struck the ground. When they whispered to each other, the fog produced faint replies, shaped like their own voices. One camper wrote, "It wasn't repeating us. It was slightly ahead of us, as if it knew the sounds before we made them." Rangers attributed the event to sound confusion at night. In 2022, a maintenance worker named Reggie Turner described the fog in his daily log. Turner was known for plain, factual entries, rarely adding subjective observations. His note reads, "Fog patch under tall pines. Felt like it waited. Sound inside didn't behave normal." Later that year, he explained to a colleague that the fog seemed to hold his footsteps, delaying them until after he moved. Turner's log was marked with a supervisor's comment, "Atmospheric distortion." Across all these decades of reports, the fog never behaves like weather. It appears in dry conditions, under clear skies, at unpredictable hours. It forms circular or oval shapes, rarely drifting. Sound shifts inside it, whispers amplify, footsteps echo ahead or behind, and occasionally, noises repeat that were never made. Visitors do not describe panic or fear. They describe confusion, quiet, and the sense that the fog is aware of sound, though they do not use dramatic language to explain it. The fog stays only for a few minutes at a time. When it fades, it leaves no moisture on the ground, no dampness on clothing, and no trace that it existed at all. Its presence remains limited to notes, statements, and a handful of recordings, small details that form a long-running pattern inside the deeper regions of Pinehaven, especially the ones already known for missing signals, shifting terrain, and places where footsteps stop without explanation. The fog listens, but it does not speak. It appears when it chooses, holds sound in ways that defy simple explanation, then withdraws quietly back into the forest. The campfire that never went out. The first record of the persistent campfire comes from a ranger incident sheet dated the 12th of May 1982. Ranger Paul Hensley, on a routine perimeter sweep, discovered a circular fire pit positioned deep within a restricted section of older forest. The coals in the pit glowed faintly, as if recently stirred. Hensley noted that no visitors had been permitted in that region for over a week, and no ranger crews had passed through during the previous 72 hours. His entry reads, "Coals warm, no smoke, no ignition source nearby." The pit was dismantled on the spot, but when Hensley returned 2 days later, he found the same fire pit reconstructed, again with warm coals. Only one follow-up remark was written, "Maybe returning trespasser. Will monitor." No trespasser was ever identified. A similar report appeared in October 1987. A wildlife biologist, Dr. Celia Harwood, conducting an early morning survey, walked through a hollow where she found a ring of stones surrounding a shallow bowl of glowing embers. The air was still and cold, yet Harwood noted that the warmth radiating from the pit felt steady, as though the fire had held a constant temperature for hours. She placed her hand near the coals and reported no change in heat as she moved closer or farther away. There was no smoke trail leading into the air. Harwood made a sketch in her field notebook, which is still archived. Her supervisor later wrote, "Possible left-behind fire. Not enough evidence to escalate." The next record surfaced in 1994 during a storm. A ranger team, checking for fallen branches along the northern trail, noticed a dim orange glow beneath a cluster of spruce trees. When they approached, they found a fire pit identical to earlier descriptions, small, clean, and containing coals that glowed steadily despite the rain. One ranger pressed a metal probe into the embers. The tip warmed immediately. The ground surrounding the pit, however, remained completely dry. The rain did not touch it. In his written report, Ranger Dean Harper wrote, "Fire appears protected by something. No smoke, no visible flame, coals too uniform." The incident was quietly filed without public notice. In 2001, during a wildfire risk inspection, Ranger Lila McKinney discovered another fire pit on a narrow ridge rarely visited by hikers. This one sat on ground covered in thick pine needles, yet none of the needles showed signs of scorch or heat damage. McKinney lifted several coals with a metal scoop and found that they produced steady warmth. but not in the way embers normally do. She wrote, "Heat constant, no fluctuation, coals not crumbling." When she returned the next morning, the fire pit looked freshly arranged and the coals were again warm. McKinney later told a colleague that the stones around the pit never gathered soot. They remained clean, as if the fire somehow burned without producing residue. Her comment was not included in the formal report. The repeated sightings grew more frequent in the late 2000s. In 2008, a pair of experienced backpackers reported stumbling upon a small fire pit while traveling through a closed restoration zone. They said the coals glowed red but gave off no smoke or smell. The warmth, according to their statement, felt even, not flickering or pulsing. When they attempted to photograph the pit, the image captured only the stones. The coals appeared dull, as though not lit at all. Their digital camera, however, showed a brief distortion across the lower half of the frame as they approached the pit. Rangers dismissed the account as a camera malfunction. In 2013, a search and rescue team encountered a campfire pit during a mission to locate a missing trail runner. The team leader, Ranger Mason Carter, noted the pit's precise shape and clean structure. He wrote, "Coals bright, no flame, no ash pattern, ground beneath pit cool." The team circled the site, searching for footprints or discarded gear. There were none. Carter's final line reads, "Cannot determine who lit fire. No one should be here." The missing runner was later found miles away, unaware of any fire in that section of the forest. The most unusual account came in 2017 from a geologist visiting the park for soil analysis. While alone near the central corridor, he saw a faint glow between tree trunks and followed it. He found a fire pit, identical in appearance to earlier reports. He described the coals as glowing but unmoving, maintaining brightness, like lights rather than embers. He held his hand above them and noted that the heat lacked the normal rise and fall pattern of burning material. The warmth felt steady and quiet, as if produced by something not consuming fuel. His report was never added to the public log, but was copied into the archive drawer labelled Atypical Events. In 2020, during a rare early snowfall, a ranger patrol discovered a fire pit sitting in a shallow depression filled with fresh snow. The snow around the pit remained untouched. No melt circle, no softening, no steam. The coals glowed beneath the cold air. Ranger notes mention that the pit stones held no frost and no moisture, despite the falling snow. The report concluded, "Fire appears isolated from environment, cause unknown." The coals, in every case, share the same qualities: steady glow, consistent warmth, no flame, no ash pattern, and no environmental interaction. They do not char surrounding objects. They do not smoke. They do not produce shifting light. Rangers who observed the pits described them in plain terms: odd, warm, constant, never dramatic. No visitors have ever been found near the fire pits, and no lost hikers have been recorded as carrying fire-starting equipment that could create such controlled, residue-free heat. The pits seem rebuilt each time, with identical stone shapes arranged in similar circles. Rangers once attempted to remove the stones entirely, scattering them across the forest floor. When the next pit appeared, the stones around it matched the original set: smooth, round, pale-coloured, the same size and weight as the ones moved. Even now, rangers occasionally find such fire pits during off-trail inspections. The first instruction given during training is simple: dismantle the pit and record the coordinates. The second instruction, offered quietly by senior staff, is equally simple: don't try to trace who built it. The campfire that never goes out leaves no trail, no smoke, no explanation. It sits briefly in the forest, radiating steady warmth in places where no one should be, before disappearing and appearing again somewhere else, unconnected to weather, visitors, or any known pattern. Rangers rarely speak of it in front of the public, but its presence is well known in the archives, forming another quiet thread in Pinehaven's long record of anomalies. The path where voices follow. The earliest reference to the echoing path comes from an undated card found in a retired ranger's field notebook from the late 1960 seconds. The card contains only one line: "Voices along narrow trail do not match speakers. No coordinates, no explanation." The notebook belonged to Ranger Ellis Marr, who left Pinehaven in 1971. His notes remain some of the few documents from that era that mention sound behaving strangely inside the park. The next record appears in 1977, when a pair of hikers from Oregon reported hearing soft imitations of their own voices while traveling along a thin footpath in the central forest. They wrote that the trail felt unusually still, with no birdsong or wind movement. As they walked, they heard delayed versions of their conversation behind them. According to the statement, the echoes were not quite correct, a few words missing, a few altered, and the tones slightly flatter. When the hikers turned, they saw no one. Their report was logged under unusual acoustics and set aside. In 1984, a ranger patrol documented a similar event. Ranger Nancy Elwood wrote in her day log that she heard her partner calling her name repeatedly from a short distance behind. When she turned, her partner was several yards ahead and had not spoken. Elwood wrote, "Voice came from behind, same pitch, same cadence, but not time to anything said." She tested the path by calling her partner's name again. This time, only silence followed. Elwood attributed the incident to sound drift, but she noted that the trail's layout did not lend itself to echoes. The slope was gentle, the trees thick, and the ground soft conditions that typically absorb sound. Reports increased through the 1,990 seconds. In 1992, a family hiking the narrow trail near the West Corridor noticed faint murmurs behind them. They believed another group was approaching, but when they stepped aside to let others pass, the murmurs stopped. The moment they resumed walking, the sounds returned matching their pace, trailing just a few steps back. The father wrote, "It felt like someone repeating us, except quieter." Rangers suggested wind distortion. One of the most detailed accounts came from 1999, recorded by a college student named Adrian King. King and two friends walked the same narrow path on an overcast afternoon. King wrote that he said, "Let's keep going before it rains," and immediately heard the same sentence behind him but shortened, spoken in an unfamiliar tone. His friends heard different phrases, words they had not said but recognized as fragments of their own voices. King added, "It didn't sound threatening, just incomplete." Their statement was filed, but never included in the public log. During the 2006 search for missing teacher Harold Baines, two rangers briefly reported hearing a voice calling, "Over here," repeating faintly behind them along this same stretch of path. They followed the call until their radios failed. When backup teams traced their route, no one could replicate the sound. Ranger notes from that night include, "Voices uncertain in origin. Not ranger issue cadence." The phrase "not cadence" appears elsewhere in Pinehaven logs, typically referring to voices that do not match any known speaker. By 2010, the phenomenon gained an informal name among seasonal workers, the backstep echoes. Several interns joked about the path, claiming it speaks when it wants to. Most of the interns who joked about it had never witnessed anything firsthand. The stories circulated quietly, shared during end-of-day equipment returns or night checks near the station. A notable visitor account emerged in 2014 from two photographers documenting forest light patterns. They walked the trail just after sunrise. The fog was thin and the air calm. One photographer remarked that he heard someone whisper the word "wait." Moments later, his partner said she heard faint humming, an exact copy of the tune she had been humming earlier. They retraced their steps twice, but the sounds did not repeat. Their audio recorders captured only static in those moments. The park thanked them for the submission but did not respond further. In 2017, a runner training on the narrow path submitted a short video. In the clip, she breathes steadily and the forest appears quiet. At one point, a faint voice repeats her own exhale half a second late. The voice does not match her pace perfectly, it sounds slightly slower, as if following from a distance. When she stops running, the echo stops immediately, even before her real breathing fully settles. The video was archived under atypical sound events. Another unusual record comes from 2019, when two maintenance workers performed trail inspection near the corridor. As they walked, they discussed the angle of a leaning pine. 30 seconds later, they heard the same conversation behind them but shortened, missing parts of sentences. One worker wrote, "It was like someone repeating our talk, but only catching the important words." They left the area shortly after. Their supervisor wrote in the margin, "Environmental audio reflection." In 2021, a lone hiker submitted a written account. She wrote that she heard someone call her name 3 times, each quieter than the last. The voice was hers. She turned, expecting to see another hiker, but the trail behind her was empty. She described the sensation not as frightening, but strangely flat, like sound without weight. Her phone recorded nothing unusual. Multiple accounts emphasized the same details. The The voices do not threaten, do not shout, do not express intent. They mimic, repeat, or reassemble fragments of speech in ways that resemble reflections but not true echoes. They often appear slightly ahead or slightly behind the speaker's rhythm. They vary in length. Some repeat breath sounds, others repeat single words. A few produce sentences never spoken aloud. Rangers seldom mention the path in public briefings. Internally, they mark it as a location where sound behaves unusually, though no formal testing has ever confirmed structural causes. The terrain does not produce known echo patterns. The trees and soil absorb sound rather than reflect it. The narrow shape of the path does not create natural acoustics that would explain delayed or duplicated voices. Visitors who experience the phenomenon describe it in plain language. They do not embellish. They write what they heard, how it differed from a normal echo, and how it followed them briefly before fading. The path offers no sudden shifts in landscape, no dramatic markers. It is simply a thin trail, winding quietly between high pines. And in that quiet, voices follow soft, pale copies of words, spoken or half-formed, drifting a few steps behind until they dissolve into the forest. The clock that lost an hour. The earliest time loss account in Pinehaven comes from a small handwritten statement dated the 4th of June 1973. A pair of hikers, Thomas and Linda Price, reported that their walk felt shorter than the clock showed. They left the east trailhead at 9:10 a.m., reached a mid-trail bench by what they believed was 10, and returned to their car at what felt like a little past noon. Their vehicle clock read 1:17 p.m. Linda wrote, "It didn't feel like we walked 4 hours." No further investigation was made. Rangers wrote the discrepancy off as fatigue misperception. Another entry surfaced in 1980, when a school teacher named Glenn Porter led a group on a short loop intended to take 90 minutes. Porter used a mechanical wristwatch. Another chaperone carried a digital one. Porter said his watch showed they had returned almost exactly on schedule. The other chaperone's digital watch showed they were nearly an hour late. Porter had no explanation. Rangers attributed it to incorrect device settings. The phenomenon became more defined in 1989. Two experienced hikers, Mara and Joel Deaton, tracked their route with a stopwatch clipped to Joel's pack. They walked from Ridgepoint to the Lower Creek Path, a trip that typically took under 2 hours. Their stopwatch recorded 2 hours and 11 minutes. But Mara's wristwatch and the time on the trailhead sign-in sheet showed they had been gone for over 3 hours. Joel wrote in his visitor report, "We didn't stop, no delays, no reason for the extra hour." Rangers suggested the stopwatch malfunctioned, though Joel kept it for years and reported no further issues. In 1994, during the search for a lost hiker, 2 ranger teams reported conflicting times when they regrouped at a planned meeting point. Team A believed they left their previous post at 3:40 p.m. Team B believed it was closer to 4:30 p.m. When they compared device logs later, both teams discovered a 1-hour difference in their recorded timestamps, though they had walked the same stretch of trail. The official report labeled the discrepancy communication drift. A more precise account arrived in 2002, when a maintenance worker, Tony Mendez, carried a newly tested digital field timer while inspecting storm damage. He recorded his starting time as 10:03 a.m. The inspection should have taken 30 to 40 minutes. When Mendez emerged from the same trail at what he believed was just before 11, the field timer showed 56 minutes elapsed, but his phone kept powered off, displayed 12:04 p.m. His note in the maintenance log reads simply, "Timer accurate, phone accurate, unsure." Both devices functioned normally in subsequent tests. One of the strongest early data points came from 2009, when a geocache group used GPS units with internal clocks. They noted that entering the narrow corridor near the pine cluster triggered a syncing delay on all 3 units. Each device stamped a waypoint, paused, then stamped the next one exactly 1 hour ahead. The GPS tracks show clean, continuous motion, no missing segments, yet the timestamps jump. The group posted their findings online, but the post was later removed after a park request citing incorrect reference data. In 2014, a lone hiker named David Kent described losing time during a late afternoon walk. He remembered stopping to take a picture of moss on a fallen log. Sunlight still sat high above him, and he believed it was around 3:30 p.m. His phone's timestamp on the photo read 4:28. Kent wrote, "I didn't feel anything. Trail looked normal. Light looked the same." When he checked the next photo, taken roughly 10 minutes later, the timestamp gap had had corrected itself. His time loss appeared only once, inside a small zone of the trail. Ranger logs from 2016 mention a similar incident during patrol. Ranger Marissa Hale's body radio recorded transmissions on an automated cycle set to ping at fixed intervals. When she walked through a section near the old creek bend, the pings began spacing exactly 1 hour apart, even though her movement remained steady. Once she exited the zone, the intervals returned to normal. Hale wrote, "Internal clock glitch unlikely. Pattern too clean." Her supervisor added the comment, "Record but do not escalate." A notable civilian report appeared in 2018. Two friends hiking the west slope, each wore fitness trackers. Their devices counted steps accurately and logged GPS positions normally, but when they compared their elapsed times, one tracker showed 2 hours and 14 minutes, while the other showed 3 hours and 14 minutes. Both devices synced to the same phone earlier that morning. Neither had low battery or connectivity issues. Their written statement includes the line, "Trail felt short, clocks felt long." In 2020, a family hiking with a GoPro recorded a moment where the device's timestamp jumped ahead by exactly 60 minutes, while the footage continued with no visible cut. The father reviewed the file multiple times and noted, "Camera time moves forward faster than video length." When he submitted the footage to the ranger station, the staff recorded it but offered no assessment. The anomaly was filed under digital irregularity. The most detailed internal record comes from 2021, when a ranger trainee, Sarah Nichols, carried 2 synchronized watches, one digital, one analog, during a training exercise. At the start of her loop, the watches matched. As she entered a wooded stretch inside section 42B, the digital watch began to drift, slowly advancing until it was exactly 1 hour ahead. The analog watch remained accurate. When Nichols exited the area, the digital watch did not correct itself. She wrote, "Drift stable, no error message, no battery warning." Her case was listed as device malfunction, though the watch later tested normally at the station. Across these accounts, the pattern is consistent. Devices disagree with each other about elapsed time, always by approximately 60 minutes. Sometimes the lost hour appears in personal perception. Sometimes it appears in mechanical or digital clocks. Sometimes both. The discrepancy occurs most often inside the corridor, already known for shifting signals, shadowless trees, and vanished footprints. Visitors who experience it rarely describe fear. Instead, they write that the forest felt normal, looked unchanged, or didn't feel longer than usual. The missing hour shows up only in retrospect after checking a phone, a map, a GPS track, or a watch face. No official investigation has ever been conducted. Rangers attribute the inconsistencies to device error, misremembered time, or atmospheric interference. The archive notes suggest a different pattern. The missing hour repeats, always in certain parts of Pinehaven, always quietly, always without a physical marker to explain it. The clocks lose time, or gain it, or slide sideways for a moment, leaving hikers to discover only later that they carried an hour they never lived. The ranger who walked out twice. The story begins with a standard patrol completed on the 5th of September 1996. Ranger Daniel Hurst left the North Station at 7:04 a.m., walking his usual loop along the central corridor. His route was simple down the access road, across the narrow path where voices sometimes follow, past the creek bend with the shadowless pine, and finally toward the old ridgeline where radios tend to fail. Hurst had walked the loop hundreds of times. Nothing in the early logs suggests he expected the day to be unusual. His patrol sheet shows a clean record. Left station 7:04, returned 9:32, route clear. That was the first record. The second surfaced 3 months later during a routine audit of the automatic gate logs that recorded entries and exits electronically, without ranger input. The gate system time-stamped Hurst entering the park interior at 7:04 a.m. as expected, but the corresponding exit timestamp did not read 9:32 a.m. The gate recorded Ranger Hurst exiting the interior zone at 10:38 a.m. 2 exit times, 1 ranger, 1 route. The discovery raised questions, though no one mentioned it aloud at first. Maybe the gate malfunctioned, maybe someone else triggered the sensor, but the log lists badge numbers for every movement. Both timestamps were tagged with Hurst's badge. When asked, Hurst insisted he returned at 9:32, wrote his notes, cleaned his boots, and sat in the break room, while another ranger prepared his own patrol. No one recalled seeing Hearst leave again. No one recalled him returning at 10:38. When supervisors compared his handwritten patrol sheet with the gate logs, they found something stranger. The system also recorded a brief radio ping occurring between 10:12 and 10:14 a.m. 2 short static bursts logged automatically when a ranger radio passes fixed repeater points. The pings matched Hearst's radio ID. He should not have been on the trail then. He should not have been in the forest at all. An internal meeting was held on September 12. The transcript plainly states, Hearst denies second patrol. He did not describe dizziness, memory gaps or confusion. He simply said he walked once, returned once, and did not leave again. He offered to walk the route with supervisors to confirm his familiarity, but they declined. No explanation was reached. A ranger reviewing older files later found that Hearst's patrol on the 22nd of October 1994 showed a similar inconsistency, a handwritten exit at 11:18 a.m., but a gate exit at 12:20. No one had noticed at the time. In 1998, 2 years after the first double exit discovery, Hearst left Pinehaven to work at a smaller park. Before he left, he completed one final patrol. It was uneventful, his notes are clear and brief, but the gate log quietly, automatically recorded 2 entries that morning, and 2 exits. The timestamps were spaced 1 hour apart, almost perfectly. Hearst wrote only 1 set of notes. He remembered only 1 walk. In the decades since, rangers have occasionally whispered about the Hearst pattern, though no one uses the term publicly. It describes a person completing a route twice without knowing they did, or a system claiming they walked where their memory says they weren't. The phenomenon has not been recorded for any other ranger with such clarity, though scattered hints appear in a few logs. A double timestamp here, a duplicated ping there. Entries that seem copied forward by a clock that cannot copy. Those familiar with Pinehaven's anomalies lost shadows, moving clearings, listening fog, footprints that stop, voices that follow see the Hearst pattern as part of the same quiet thread. It does not stand out as dramatic or alarming. It sits quietly in the archive, composed of small mismatches and unremarkable handwriting. The forest never acknowledged it, rangers never explained it. It remains a record of a path walked once on paper and twice in data, 2 overlapping routes, separated by an hour, joined by the same badge and the same man. On Hearst's final day, he turned in his radio, his badge, and his uniform shirt. He greeted the receptionist before leaving, and she logged his departure at 3:02 p.m. The automatic gate recorded a departure at 4:03 p.m. There is no reason those times should differ. The receptionist remembers seeing him leave. The gate has no memory to trust or doubt. Both records sit in the file. No one ever asked Hearst which exit truly belonged to him. The question was never written in any official transcript, and no supervisor pursued it. The park simply filed the paperwork and closed the binder. Today, the corridor where his times diverged looks the same as it did in the 1,990 seconds. The narrow trail curves gently between heavy pines. The ground absorbs footsteps. The ridgeline still cuts signals near the top. Visitors walk the path and hear only the soft folding of leaves beneath their boots. But the logs remain plain, steady, without embellishment. One ranger walked a route. The forest returned him twice. And inside Pinehaven, the quiet patterns continue, subtle and consistent, forming a record that the park has never addressed aloud. Paths that repeat, clocks that rearrange themselves, and people whose journeys return with more than one ending. If you've made it this far through Pinehaven's silent anomalies, you've seen how the forest holds patterns that never declare themselves, vanished shadows, echoes that don't belong, fog that listens, and time that does not always hold its shape. These stories come from logs, statements, and field notes written without drama, just quiet observations from people who walked deeper than most. If you want more investigations into places like this, places where the maps shift, the clocks drift, and the stories stay just out of reach, make sure to like, subscribe, and turn on notifications. It helps keep this channel exploring the overlooked edges of the world, one quiet mystery at a time. And if you've ever visited a place where the rules of sound, time, or light felt different, share your experience in the comments. Someone else might have walked the same path. Thanks for watching, and stay safe out there.